even in the careers we love, there are aspects of working life that we find get in the way of actually doing the work we love. And that's particularly true in the creative sectors. So research, some of which we're going to go through today, suggests that while global workers think that they spend around 35% of their time on the job, on the work about work, in reality, it's nearly double that. I think anecdotally, quite a few of us would know that instinctively, but it's rare to see research that backs that up. So this Drumcast, in partnership with Asana, we're going to examine solutions to the issues of work about work, both technological and socially based solutions. So I'm Chris Sutcliffe, I'm the editor of the Drum Network, and Joshua, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Josh Zirkle. I am the head of global community at Asana, based in San Francisco.
Fantastic. So just as a brief run through of the agenda, first of all, we're going to be talking about the anatomy of work, and then really examining how we're all spending time at work and almost how we're spending time at work about work. And then as a result, what impact that's having on not just our own output, but that of the wider company and actually of sectors as a whole. And so finally, we're then going to discuss how we can potentially remove barriers to productivity. So really going through some solutions to that. Fantastic. So Joshua, if you want to kick us off by really explaining, I suppose, why did you commission a study about work about work?
Yeah, so at Asana, we are dedicated to helping teams orchestrate all of their work from the biggest strategic initiatives down to the everyday tasks that each person needs to complete. And as part of that, we're really interested in how people work. We can make tools to help solve it, but in order to best do that, we really want to understand some of the challenges that people are facing. And what we found via the Anatomy of Work study is that even the most efficient workers face challenges in dealing with a lot of the work about work that you mentioned. And there's a really big disconnect between the investments in time versus investments in resources and how that plays out in terms of people's productivity. So we commissioned this study to help businesses and the individuals working within them really understand where inefficiencies lie and, more importantly, what to do about them.
So was this as a result of your own experiences and recognizing there was a need to actually have some concrete figures about this?
Yeah, in part. My previous life prior to joining Asana, I was a productivity consultant. So I saw a lot of these challenges happen for all the businesses that I worked with. And we at Asana know anecdotally, as you mentioned, that these are big problems, but we didn't really know exactly how much, and we really wanted to help people quantify it.
Fantastic.
So some of the things that initial research showed was just the proportion of teams that are requesting creative as part of their work has gone up substantially in the last 20 years, but the resources to support those teams hasn't. And it requires a lot of productivity, both on a team and an individual level, to keep up with this demand. And the Anatomy of Work really dug deep into how people are spending their time on a day-to-day basis and weekly to figure out how marketing and creative teams can better support this demand that they're now facing.
Yeah, so that's a very, very scary graph.
Yeah, I think as a marketer myself, I saw this, and again, anecdotally, we feel this, but we'd never seen it played out in the numbers. But yeah, kind of terrifying.
Yeah, it really is. I suppose it's one of those things that it changes so, well, obviously rapidly, but gradually at the same time, you almost don't notice that there is this huge disparity there.
Yeah, the change has been so slow and I would say so insidious that it's happening and we feel it, but we can't really quite put our finger on it.
Fantastic. So what have been some of the key findings of the report then?
Yeah, I think in part we have seen a lot of disconnect between how much time people think they're spending on what we at Asana call work about work, which is everything that is not your core focus of your job. And really, in reality, people spend double what they had estimated. Most people reported that they thought they spent about 35% on work about work, but the reality was it was 70%, or 60% rather. So it's quite a bit of their time is spent not on their core job. And the core job is what they're there to do, what they're most passionate about. And the rest of it is just administrative overhead, meetings, email, duplicating work that's already been done by someone else. So as a productivity consultant, I've seen people get caught in this work about work spiral over and over again. And it's really distressing for most people, and it leads to burnout.
Do you find that it snowballs as well?
It does. Because this is a problem that is seldom addressed, it just continues to grow over time. If people aren't given the tools and the skills and the processes to help them manage the day-to-day administrative overhead that they have, and strategies aren't put in place by the business as a whole, there's no way that this will just go away on its own.
No, absolutely not.
If only.
Yeah, I wish. So then how are workers spending their time, when it's actually doing that work about work?
Yeah, it really boils down to three main categories. The first is meetings. Most of us that work have a lot of meetings, many of which we sit
Yep.
there wondering, why am I in this meeting? So that was the first thing that was reported. The second finding was that people spend a lot of time with messaging, whether it's instant messaging or email. A lot of time is spent devoting to their work mind and their time to really digging out of that inbox. And for most of us, it's multiple inboxes. And then the third main category that we found is that on average, people are spending a lot of time each week duplicating work that has already been done by someone else or even by themselves that they may have forgotten that they've done. So it was really interesting reading this report to see that there were these really clear buckets of productivity black holes for most people.
Yeah, no, I'm staring at each of those and I felt a little bit of anxiety coming because I recognize each and every one of them myself, and I'm sure that's true for most people who work in most sectors.
Yeah, for sure. I actually was really surprised when I saw the stat about the number of hours each week that there's duplicated work. And this is a UK stat, it's almost 5 hours a week.
Oh,
And so
God.
that's 200 hours over the course of a
Oh,
year
no.
that are spent just redoing work. Shocking. That's a lot of skilled time being wasted.
Yeah, it really is. What I think is interesting is that obviously people are aware that they are doing this. They are aware that they are performing work about work. So what then is the impact of that? Is that demoralizing, not just recognizing that you are going over well-trodden ground, but that it's actually getting in the way of stuff that could be done, more productively?
Yeah, I think most people go into a given job because they're really passionate about the core work, whether they're designers or writers or editors. They love that piece of it. And for all of us, we want to focus on that part of our work that we love. But when we see that the bulk of our time is spent on this overhead of meetings and email and duplicating work and switching between apps and tools and all the things that aren't that thing that we want to do, it's really demotivating. And 60% of the people that we talked to said their time is spent on this coordination and overhead. And that means there's really little time left to do that work that you're so excited about. And when you can't focus on that, your morale at work goes down. And of course, when you aren't motivated, you're not productive.
No, absolutely not. That stat at the bottom there, nearly half of the hours in the standard work week are then spent effectively not performing the work that you enjoy. That, again, as much as the chart before was scary, that might be even scarier.
Well, yeah, because it means that you're at work doing other things than what you really love.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
beyond just being a bummer, it's just like the company that you're working with and your teammates, and in the end, the thing that you produce would be so much better if more of your time was focused on what you really love. So what we're looking at here is a set of challenges that are faced by all marketers. We focus really on the channel, the deliverable, and where it's going to go, and that's where most of the investment in terms of resources financially go into when we're looking at marketing work. However, the bulk of our time is spent in everything that leads up to it. But that part of our work, that 80% of the time, hasn't really been invested in terms of figuring out ways to make our lives and our work easier, to streamline, document, automate processes, and just focus on the actual meat of how we work. And so we end up in this, again, productivity black hole where we have all of this work about work, and it's rampant. It's 80% of our time where we're chasing down people for approvals or looking for a piece of work that we can't find or switching between apps to make sure we're looking in the right spot for the communication that someone told us about a particular change that we need to make.
There's just such a disparity there as well. If you actually see what is generating value and what is, in fact, getting in the way of that.
Yeah, especially for marketers, we have to do so much and be creative at the same time. And it really leaves us to try to figure out how to piece together a workflow between spreadsheets and messaging and email and the tools that we have. There's so many of them, and no one is taught how to do this.
No.
But we have to figure it out somehow. So in my work, especially when I was working directly with clients, I would see the most interesting and creative ways to try to piece this together. But for the most part, it's usually ineffective.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we were just talking briefly before the recording about how do you develop those soft skills, and there really isn't provision to learn that kind of stuff. It's something you have to learn on the job, and obviously, if it's baked into the working process, you're not going to learn how to do it effectively. You're just going to stick with the tried and true time-wasting method.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, as someone who really thinks about productivity a lot, the solution to this is really finding ways and determining together as a team what tools for work management, what processes will help make this work easier for you, so you can focus on the things that you're most passionate about.
Yeah, certainly. And this all aligns with everything that we've been hearing from all our the drum members, people we talk to in the creative industries more widely, that teams are facing growing workloads, which in turn then leads them to really struggle in finding a balance between kind of the effective work, and it just leads to bottlenecks and burnout. Effectively, I think is the term that even the World Health Organization has kind of recognized as this huge, great problem.
Yeah, they've just recently classified burnout as an occupational phenomenon, which is personally terrifying to me. Like, I don't want to get burnt out. I don't want the people around me to get burnt out. And so we've seen via the research in anatomy of work that three-quarters of creatives have experienced this phenomenon of being burnt out, being at the end of their creative and work rope. And that's a real problem for employers. We focus so much on getting great people, and then we don't support them in the right ways to make them feel like they're on top of their work and they're managing their workloads well. And it stresses them out, and it leads to them having low morale, like we talked about, and then eventually leaving, looking for the next best thing.
How pervasive is this? Is this limited to one or two different countries, or is this?
No, this was in the countries that we studied this in. It was pervasive everywhere, and I think it goes back to that concept of no one is ever taught how to deal with all the things that we need to manage, and there's not the right tools and processes to help people manage and orchestrate their work. And so it's shockingly pervasive, which is, I think, why the World Health Organization has taken notice, because it is truly a global phenomenon. And here in the UK, like Australia, UK, and the US actually had 80% of people saying that they were overwhelmed.
Oh my God.
And heading towards burnout.
So the report actually breaks it down by individual countries that you've surveyed. Okay, that's really interesting.
Yeah, and although there are differences from country to country, by and large, the trend looks like it's heading in the wrong direction in terms of making people feel like they're effective and moving away from overwhelm. So one of the things that we noticed in the study is that there was also a very clear lack of alignment amongst team members on what they're actually working towards. We often know exactly what the tasks in front of us are, but there's sometimes a lack of alignment amongst a team on what we as a group are working towards as a whole. Like, what are the bigger goals and objectives that we're trying to move towards? And as someone who thinks about how people work, when people are disconnected from what the goals they're working towards are, it's really hard to stay motivated. If you can't say with certainty how the task that you're working on today ladders up to your team or your organization's bigger goals, it's really hard to say, like, what I'm doing actually matters.
Yeah, absolutely.
And everyone wants to feel like their work matters and that it's contributing to the company's mission or to a bigger goal or project that's being worked on.
Yeah, there's short-term positive reinforcement potentially, but in terms of longer-term goals, you're not getting any incentive to continue kind of working towards these goals, even if you know what they are.
Yeah, if you can't track how you're progressing towards the goals that your company has set out, how do you know how you're doing? You can't. And so it leaves you in this limbo state where you're trying to figure out, does what I do actually matter? And everyone wants to feel like what they do matters. But sadly, less than half of the people that we surveyed were clear on how their work matters to their company's mission or vision.
It's crazy how much of this does get sort of, I guess, lost along the way, because it's such a, particularly creative industries, everything moves so quickly that potentially there's just not the time taken to actually set all this out and actually even to start thinking about how you would solve that problem.
Yeah, the best teams that we've seen really do take out that, even if a small amount of time, to really say, here is what we are trying to achieve as a group, and document that and make those processes clear for everybody.
Right, that's really interesting. So the anatomy of work it's established that teams could be spending a lot more of their time at work more effectively. So how tactically, how do we go about sort of solving that? So I know the study gets a little bit more granular, and I think that actually some of the things that you've broken out there will really resonate with some of the drum members.
Absolutely. So there are 4 key areas that we saw when we looked at the study and the work about work, and they're broken out as follows. So first, there is the challenge of omnipresent email and messaging, which I think most of us are intimately familiar with. Then there's the simply too much work to do. I've been given more tasks than I can realistically accomplish, and I feel buried under them, and I'm not sure how to dig out from there. Then, especially in the creative industries, there's this other set of challenges where we often need approvals and feedback from clients or different people that we're working with to move work forward. So a lot of our time is spent chasing down approvals and feedback, or this is conflated with chasing down teammates' to get things done, because it's often unclear who is actually responsible for something and when they're responsible for doing it.
I was going to say it's almost a necessary evil because I have to spend so much time in my day actually talking to people just to get things done. It feels like it's something that's absolutely necessary, potentially just not approached in the right way.
Yeah, there are all of these parts of our work that are necessary. They're just not often managed so well, and so there are specific things that we can do. One thing that I thought was really interesting is specifically here in the UK, almost 80% of UK workers stay late regularly, and they said that the number one driver for doing that was things that feel critical, like email and messaging. But if it were managed differently, it might not mean that they need to stay late. So for me, I usually advise people to keep their messaging really simple and straightforward, and especially as it relates to your email inbox, like file, delete, forward, or take immediate action, but do something with messages right away. And finally, if an email doesn't serve you, just get rid of it. You want to reduce the amount of inputs that you have so that you can focus on the things that actually matter.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we also heard from people is that they're buried under notifications. And this is where you, as an individual worker, can decide which things are actually important to you and which things are not, and really reduce down. Use the controls that are in every application to decide which things are worth getting notified about.
Yes, and tasks now are so kind of multifaceted, and people tend to work on so many more different projects that I think we've kind of all been in that position where we have so much to do, and we have so much coming in from different gigs and different jobs and different roles that we don't actually know quite where to find that first foothold to start dealing with it all.
Yeah, and not being able to even just get started with getting yourself more productive is one of those things that can lead directly to burnout. So you often have to take a few steps back to just get a lay of the land as it relates to your work. Because we saw the biggest source of stress for 26% of knowledge workers is their growing workload. And a lot of that is related to not just having a good sense of all the things that are on your plate. You might know it kind of somewhere in the back of your mind, or have that sense of generalized overwhelm that, oh my God, I'm getting buried. But it's often hard to quantify. And so the solution here is really to have the right clarity of what you need to work on, the right tools to help support you, and then processes and hopefully some automation to help manage the bits and bobs of work so that you feel more in the driver's seat. Not that work is driving you, but that you are driving it. And especially if you're working with a team, as most of us are, even if it's a freelance group, making it clear who's responsible for what and by when is absolutely essential. That way things don't fall through the cracks. And it makes it easier, frankly, just for everyone to manage their workload.
Yeah, certainly. I'm looking at that stat there from Japan, where too much work is cited as the main barrier to being productive. And I feel like that maybe sums it all up in one big go. You don't really know where to get started.
Yeah, and this is where having more clarity really helps. And for those of us that work in creative fields, as I mentioned before, like we often have an approval process that we need to go through, and that can feel like it's adding more work onto the plate. And sometimes waiting for input from others can make work feel like it's just grinding to a halt. And so chasing teammates down, getting approvals and feedback, these are things that are part and parcel of our work. An example from one of our customers is the Manchester City Council.
Oh, right.
And they're responsible for all of the materials and marketing that go into their events, like their Christmas markets and their large-scale citywide communication campaigns. And prior to using Asana to coordinate all of this work, they had actually what I think is a really interesting strategy. Each project would be given a job bag, literally a physical bag, where all of the individual pieces of the work would be put into these bags. Probably doable if you have one or two projects, but they have 100 at any given time.
Yeah.
And managing work that way just is not scalable. And so looking for ways where you can extricate yourself from old ways of working and think about ways where you can, again, get a good sense of what's going on, clearly delineate project by project, who's working on what, have one central spot where you and your teammates can refer back to, really makes it easier for everyone to do their work. And so these are the things that help alleviate some of this approvals and feedback and chasing down of folks' work, is just centralizing the work and making it clear where we go to do the work and communicate about it.
Yeah, absolutely. You think about how many different places I have to go on a daily basis to keep track of everything.
It's a lot.
It is, absolutely. Just switching between the apps alone. I wonder how much time I actually spent physically switching between apps.
More than you might expect.
Yeah, no, I imagine, yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot. We don't spend a lot of time in our modern work thinking about how we work. Part of it is we have an array of tools at our disposal, and suddenly they all seem necessary. And having too many things to quote unquote help you is one of the barriers to productivity. Switching between apps can be really challenging because you're not just switching apps, you're switching contexts.
Yeah.
And switching contexts takes time each time you do that.
Yeah, it's we get these new different messaging platforms, and they're all supposedly in aid of kind of streamlining and productivity, and ultimately they end up kind of just sucking up a lot of time in switching between them.
Yeah, and this is where the company or the team or the organization needs to come together and really think about how they are supporting everyone who's working on a project to be more productive.
So is there, what would be the best way then that companies can really support people in being more productive, if there was one or two different aspects that they could maybe shift?
Yeah, I think first there needs to be some effort and thought put into what apps and tools are really necessary, and streamline the number that people are expected to manage and deal with, whether that's reducing down the number of tools or defining what each tool is for. So for instance, messaging to external clients and vendors happens in email. Internal messaging happens in Asana if it's related to a project, and Slack if it's like, hey, do you want to grab lunch?
Right.
So that's sort of very clear. This tool is for this purpose, can help reduce that sense of overwhelm. So for me, for instance, I work at Asana, granted, so we use Asana for everything. But when there's communication about a project, I know to look in one spot in that project in Asana. Not, maybe I need to search my Gmail, and then I also need to go through and search messages in Slack. Just reducing bits and pieces of overwhelm that way really, really helps. So it doesn't have to be a big deal process to get started with this.
And do you find that it has to be rigidly enforced? I can imagine that every now and then somebody might just send an email because they happen to be on the email app and they just want to invite somebody out to lunch that way.
Yeah, especially as newer people come on, it helps to reinforce this clarity of where things go and how we work. So for instance, if a new person starts at Asana and they send me something in email related to a project, I'll make a task out of that in Asana and respond back to them in a task. So I'm helping them with training wheels on here's how we do things here. And a lot of this goal of reducing productivity barriers is again related to clarity. Like, let's get clear on what we're trying to achieve as a team. Let's get clear on here are the resources and tools, systems and processes that we have decided together are going to help us achieve that.
Yeah, certainly it's almost like filtering through this mess and actually finding, putting some structures in place that make it a lot easier to understand even from the off.
For sure. Yeah, it's really about coming together and putting all of that in place and agreeing on it that can really help. And actually, to me, one of the most interesting things that came out of the NMA work study is also kind of the saddest, and it's about how connected people feel to their work when they're feeling this sense of overwhelm from work about work. 62% of people reported that they're asked to do things that aren't connected to their core work or the things that they feel most passionate about because they're not clear on what the goals of their teams are. And so to stay motivated and get the best results, even if you've reduced the number of apps and tools that your team is using and you've clearly defined what each tool is for, if people aren't clear on why they're there and how their work matters, you're still missing a big piece of this puzzle. And so to me, for teams to be really productive, and this is borne out in our study, is that leaders need to really be clear with everyone on here is why we are doing what we're doing, document goals and the milestones that ladder up to them so that everyone can feel connected and everyone can stay motivated and feel like when they come into work on a given day, they know how their work matters and why they're doing what they're doing. And I've seen a lot of companies just kind of ignore this piece as if it's an afterthought, but this is the most important thing. And we've seen a 2x improvement in productivity when teams start to focus on this.
Yeah, 62%.
Yeah,
That's
it's
huge.
shocking.
Yeah, it really is. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, and again, it's this type of thing where I think it just kind of goes unsaid, like, oh, everyone knows why they're here. We all know what we're working towards. But the study, the data actually says people don't.
And I suppose that, as goals shift and as companies progress down that path, it requires constant updates. It can't just be an introductory thing and then you understand about the business forever.
Yeah, people change. Team members come and go. New goals come into the picture and old ones might need to be revisited, and that's part of this process. So as you work with your team to set these goals and make these changes, it's critical to revisit them periodically.
So beyond that, the kind of cultural aspect of that, of leaders taking responsibility of making sure that everyone's on the same page, there are tech solutions out there as well. So what would be sort of some of the things to look for when you're, or rather, how do you best use some of those tools that you were just, sorry, I'll cut this bit out. So what would be some of the best ways to actually use some of the tools that are at our disposal to prevent them becoming, time sucks in their own right?
Yeah, I think adding more tools into the mix is often a go-to solution for most leaders and even people, independent workers, where they're like, I don't know how to do this, so let me buy a tool to fix this.
This tool looks like it fixes this problem. Let's get it in. It'll sort everything out.
Exactly, and I think most of us have found that's not usually the case. However, finding the right tools to solve the right problem and then taking the time to actually think about how you're going to implement them is what makes it work. So first is recognizing that, especially for marketers, managing work between spreadsheets and email was not intended to support our current workflows. Those are great independent tools, but they're not work management solutions. And that's really what we need. So in order to work most effectively, I think teams really need to simplify the array of tools as we talked about, manage communication, like decide this channel is for this, and then the final piece is really coordinating and orchestrating the work, really thinking through, here's the project, here are the goals for the project, here are the tasks that ladder up to it. And this is where something like Asana, a work management platform, can really help, because this is where we see teams document their goals, manage every individual piece of their project, and then keep track of the work as it's getting done. And for me, we of course use Asana on our team, and as a manager, I get to see my team's workload and make sure that no one feels overwhelmed because I can manage how many tasks they have, and I don't have to micromanage them. And then for the team members, it lets them see at a glance all the things they're responsible for and how their work ladders up to meaningful objectives that we have as a team and as a company.
So it's not necessarily just keeping track of what individuals are doing, but kind of a more holistic look at how everyone's making progress towards the company's goals as well.
Exactly. So that is, I think, where the magic happens is here's my day-to-day work, and I can clearly see how this matters to the bigger things that we as a team are trying to accomplish. And the numbers bear out that having work management software like Asana really helps. There's only 64% of people who use work management software that haven't said that it's helped them. Like the bulk of people are saying Asana and tools like it really matter in their workflow versus 27% of organizations who don't.
I suppose there is kind of the problem of inertia there though, because often people talk about automation as though it's a kind of silver bullet, but it feels like it takes an awful lot of work to actually get in place to begin with.
It can feel that way, and I understand why. To really use automation effectively, you have to think through your processes. But I've found with people, especially when I've consulted with them, once they sit down and they think through, here's how I do this, here are the steps that I take, adding in the automation piece is a natural follow-on. So in marketing, we often do a lot of repetitive tasks. If you're a creative producer, for instance, you might do a triage of intake for briefs and requests that you get. A lot of that can be automated if you know this type of request goes to a designer, this type of request goes to a writer. A lot of that triage can be automated inside of a tool like Asana. And so it's actually there to help you save time. It may take time at the beginning, but not much, definitely not as much as people expect. And I found working with people and seeing people using Asana in this way, it feels like magic for them once some of these more routine tasks are taken care of, because then they can really focus on the work that they're most passionate about. And that's exciting to see.
There's a sort of a morale aspect to it as well, as opposed to sort of just a commercial one.
Yeah, there is the mechanics of, wow, I can do more work or do my work more effectively, but it feels like, I don't have to worry about this piece anymore. And I think that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we were talking before about kind of that, just the sheer scale of the messages that we get coming in across all our different messaging apps, or at least that I do across some work.
Yeah.
And it feels like while the growth of messaging apps and platforms have helped to alleviate some of our reliance on email, and in specific use cases, it's actually kind of empowered people to stay connected in different ways. Too many channels can potentially contribute to people feeling burnt out.
Yeah.
So what potential ways are there to counteract that?
Yeah, the burnout is a real problem, as we saw, and the messaging certainly adds to that challenge. And one of the easiest strategies is, first, if you have like 6 different communication tools, chances are you have too many. So you might want to look at which ones can be combined. An easy way is if you know you're using multiple chat tools, probably choose just one.
Yeah.
Reduce the tools that you have, and then you can do, as I mentioned earlier, a definition of what each channel is for. That helps more than you might expect. because when people don't know who will respond via which channel, that creates that mental overhead. I've worked in places before where we had email, two types of chat tools. We had an internal tool that was meant for messaging, and I never knew what tool to use with which person. So I had to make a list of, if I wanted to talk to Chris,
God, yeah.
I needed to Slack him. If I wanted to talk to Emily, I needed to walk over to her desk. It's like, this is crazy making. So if we're trying to reduce this work about work, really defining channels really helps.
I suppose it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. You need to kind of establish those guidelines and have them set out in a place.
You do. And so this is something that as a team you can come together and say, okay, if we're going to be using Asana for work management, let's keep communication about projects in that spot. If we want to ask each other a quick question or if we want to go out to lunch, use Slack. And communication with external vendors, partners, clients happens via email. But that's something that you as a team need to come together, have a conversation about, and make sure everyone is trained up on the tools so that they feel confident that they can manage their work that way.
Yeah, certainly. I suppose that's different per team and per sector almost.
Yeah, this is something that there's no blanket right way to do this. This is the type of thing that each work group really needs to come together and say, here's what's right for us.
Yeah. You were saying before as well that you've implemented no meeting Wednesdays.
Yeah, at Asana we have no meetings, no standing meetings on Wednesdays.
Which is something that I think a lot of people feel jealous about. But what have been the sort of the benefits of that from the off?
Yeah, so we at Asana work just like everybody else does. We have to talk to each other, we have to come together, brainstorm, come up with ideas, and move work forward. And we also have to do focused work. And for us, we created No Meeting Wednesdays so that without any standing meetings, we have big blocks of time where we can actually sit down and focus on the work that matters, rather than moving from meeting to meeting or worrying about, can I jump into your conference room? Like, it just reduces that overhead, and we know every single week we have this time set aside to do that. And it just means everyone feels more motivated because they know they always have a block of time to look forward to focus on the work that really matters.
So it must have a psychological effect. If you know that on Wednesday you can sit down and spend a couple of hours polishing off a project or really getting to grips with something, it's almost like you might look forward to that as a sort of sector of time in its own right, rather than as work.
I do, because for me, I really like the work that I do, and I still have to meet with people a lot. And I really look forward to Wednesdays because I know that if I have a big project, I'm going to get through a big chunk of it on Wednesday. And I love that because I like what I do, and knowing that I get to sit down and do it is really exciting to me.
So you touched upon it there, but you're a marketer and you lead Asana's global community team.
Yes.
So what would be some examples you could give us about how you've used some of these principles to help your own work?
Absolutely. So I lead a team of 5 people. Together, we manage 2 elements of a community program. One is our event series, the other is our membership program. So in 2019, we launched a series of events, and we held over 175 events in 2019 with a team of 4 people. And these were across 5 continents. And so I don't know if anyone listening has ever hosted events, but even hosting one event is a fairly Herculean effort. Doing almost 200 with a team of 4 is more or less unheard of.
That's mind-boggling, yeah.
Yeah, and honestly, I couldn't have done this without the structures we put in place and the processes that we've implemented in Asana. So every single event that we do has a project in Asana, and every event has, I think, close to 125 tasks. It's a lot, from everything from finding the venue to booking a photographer, food, marketing and advertising, promotion, and then follow-ups. All of that is managed centrally. And honestly, one person really coordinates that piece of the work by herself in Asana. And without having our work managed and documented and easy to refer back to, there's no way such a small team could have achieved such scale. And that's on our event side. On the membership side, we launched our membership program in early 2019 with 0 people. And by the end of the year, we reached 1,000 members. And this is really to build word-of-mouth advocacy for Asana from the people who are most excited about it. And our team uses automation to make sure internally the right team member is responding to the right type of question and managing the right application flow for each of the people who are part of our program. So again, it's taking a lot of that mechanical work, making a process for it, and then automating it as much as possible. And all of this is with the goal of being really responsive for the people who care about Asana the most. And so for me as a marketing leader, I'm really looking at ways that we can grow and scale, but not burn out my team at the same time. And this is one of the ways that we do that.
Oh, fantastic. For, say, an existing company then, is product, or even one that's just starting up, is productivity a skill that you can learn and teach internally, or is it something that kind of has to be brought in from outside?
I'm a firm believer that productivity is a skill like any other. Some people are really good at it from the outset, but most of us need to learn it. And I think it's the type of thing where a team can decide we want to focus on this sub-problem within our work about work challenge set. So whether it's messaging or too many meetings or finding that you're duplicating work, you focus on one of those areas and look for solutions that will solve it. And then together you train people up. If you're implementing a work management solution, you set aside time to make sure everyone is on the same page with why you're using it, how it will help them, and then the mechanics of here's how it actually works. So some training and tutoring, and then you're successful.
Nice, absolutely. And that sounds, it's almost an ambition to be aiming for, to actually have productivity baked in.
Yeah, it's a goal that I think all teams can work towards.
Teams, yeah, certainly. But what about individuals? Because it feels too often that it's put upon the individual worker to deal with this on their own.
Yeah, this is the type of thing where it's a two-pronged problem. It's the team, how do we work together? And then often on an individual basis, it's how do I manage my time? How do I manage my tasks? And you need, especially if you're an individual that has some challenges with managing and being productive, having a really clear set of tasks that are assigned to you that you're responsible for, having clear deadlines for when they're due, and then setting aside time, maybe even just 5 or 10 minutes each day, to plan out your schedule, plan out how you'll do your work, so that you know that you can stay on top of what's been assigned to you.
I think that from everything that we hear from our members at the Drum, one of the things that the creative sectors has as a particular problem is this need to be constantly on and constantly accessible to clients who are, international.
Yeah.
So how do you sort of factor in that need to be always on with the need to prevent burnout?
It's tough because we as a creative culture have built this expectation with clients that, hey, whatever you need, I'm there for you whenever you need it. I think it requires some retraining of our relationships with clients to say, I'm available for the most part during these hours. This is when, if you have a request, unless it's urgent, please send it to me then and I'll address it within 48 hours or 2 business days. But letting them know that you have a life like everybody else does and that you're happy to work on things if they are truly urgent. But that involves you training your client on what truly urgent means. And everything may feel urgent to them, but maybe you outline for them like these types of requests with these types of deadlines. Feel free to ping me after hours, but for the most part, I'll be much more effective for you if you message me during this set of time.
Oh, interesting. So it's almost setting out the fact that you can deliver more value if you're not constantly on.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting way of going about it.
Yeah, because they want your best. And you can say, I'll give you my best if you message me with these parameters.
Nice. And then just as a final question, given how effective they can be, what are some of the barriers to getting work management solutions in across more businesses more widely?
I think this is still a relatively nascent field. Not a lot of folks are familiar that there are tools to help support your work. A lot of people that we meet are managing their work in spreadsheets. And so the challenge is getting people to really understand that there are new and better ways of working and helping them understand which workflows to put into work management tools. Luckily for Asana, we have some really great templates built into the product, a lot of which are targeted on creative workflows to help people get started. And we have a lot of great articles on our blog, exactly how to help.
Well, in fact, building on that, I know that a lot of our members would be interested to read up on some of these, some of the stats that are included in the report. I think that the more people are aware of their own working practices, the more likely they are to be able to take steps to fix some of that.
Exactly.
I mean, that stat about people spending twice as much time as they think on work about work, and it's already quite a high number, is kind of, well, terrifying. And I think that the more aware you are about that, the more likely you are to fix it.
Yeah, it's the type of thing where, again, you can't solve a problem if you can't put your finger on it. And that's where something like knowing what your challenge areas are, putting your finger on them, and then deciding what to do about them is critical. And the Anatomy of Work project is one of the most exciting things that I've seen in my career, and it is meaningfully helpful to people when they read it, see themselves in it, and then figure out what to do about their own challenges.
No, amazing. And for any members who would like to see that research, it's actually available via the Drum. So thank you very much, Joshua. That's been fantastic. Thanks very much for tuning in, and for everybody who's taken the time to watch the webinar. Fantastic. Thank you. Goodbye.